I watched from the kitchen window as the phony security guard's hand struck my wife's face. I was in the middle of preparing a surprise lunch for Sarah, having just returned from training ahead of schedule, when I spotted this rent-a-cop yelling at her in our own driveway. She was juggling bags of groceries, making an effort to remain composed. The scent of spilled milk was already rising from the hot Texas asphalt, and then it happened. The sound of the slap was sharp. He hit my wife, a pediatric nurse, squarely across her face. Sarah staggered back, groceries scattering everywhere. This maniac proceeded to crush our eggs under his boot as if he were destroying hopes. Then he adjusted his fake badge and smirked. "Next time, follow HOA rules, lady." What he couldn't have known was the nature of the training I had just come back from. Advanced combat techniques, the kind they don't cover in mall security orientation. How would you react if some wannabe officer assaulted your spouse? Leave a comment from wherever you are viewing this. I would wager that half of you have your own HOA horror stories. This phony cop was about to discover exactly why you don't tangle with military families. Let me rewind and explain how we arrived at this point. I am Commander Jake Steele, a Navy SEAL with 15 years of active duty, recently moved to the reserves. My training involves learning to neutralize threats in 12 different ways before most people have had their morning coffee. My wife, Sarah, is a pediatric nurse at San Antonio Children's Hospital. A woman who believes in solving issues with kindness over force. Opposites attract, I suppose. Our children, Emma, 12, and Marcus, 9, are straight-A students who believe their dad's job is mostly swimming and camping. If only they were aware. 6 months prior, we purchased our ideal home in Oakwood Estates, a community of 200 houses representing suburban perfection just outside San Antonio, where the aroma of fresh mulch greets you each morning and the automatic sprinklers sound like miniature machine guns at dawn. Every lawn is kept at a regulation height. Every driveway is immaculate, and every resident contributes $350 monthly to uphold this piece of American paradise. Most of our neighbors appeared to be normal. The Chens next door brought us homemade dumplings. Their garden smells divine when Mrs. Chun is cooking. The Rodriguez family, 3 houses away, always waves from their perfectly maintained porch. It's the kind of place where the sound of children's laughter carries between homes and Friday night barbecues make the entire street smell of mesquite smoke. Then we were introduced to our neighborhood's personal dictator, Brenda Hartwell. Imagine every Karen stereotype, but weaponized and granted legal power. She is 52 years old, with a bleached bob haircut so sharp it could slice glass, and is perpetually clad in designer athletic wear. Even though the only exercise she seems to get is jumping to conclusions, she operates a white BMW SUV bearing vanity plates that read Hopers, because subtlety clearly perished with her previous marriage. Brenda is our HOA president, a role she treats as if she's governing her own petty dictatorship. She is also a real estate agent, the kind who would smile while foreclosing on your grandmother's house. Recently divorced and bitter about losing half of her assets, she seems determined to make everyone else suffer for her personal turmoil. In our second week in this paradise, I returned from the base to discover a violation notice zip-tied to our mailbox like a scarlet letter. Our transgression? Displaying a small American flag in our front yard. Apparently, Old Glory was in breach of the unapproved holiday decoration policy. The fine was $150, with a demand to remove it within 48 hours or incur daily penalties that would make loan sharks envious. Sarah phoned Brenda to discuss the matter politely. She received a lecture on preserving community standards. Brenda's precise words, dripping with condescension, were, "Military families sometimes struggle adapting to civilian community expectations. Here's an interesting fact. I've successfully adapted to hostile territories in 4 different countries, yet it seems suburban Texas was to be my Waterloo. I chose the high road, took down the flag for the time being, and planned to change the system from the inside." Sarah held on to the belief that perhaps Brenda was merely misunderstood, that we might find some common ground. That optimism held until Brenda deployed her secret weapon. Introducing Derek Hartwell, 28 years old, Brenda's jobless nephew and our newly appointed security contractor. Derek is the result of what happens when delusions of grandeur collide with utter incompetence. He failed the police academy admissions process twice. His psychological evaluation noted a temperament unsuitable for law enforcement. In plain terms, too dense to be a genuine police officer. He patrols in a white pickup truck adorned with magnetic security signs that likely came from a cereal box, He sports a surplus security uniform that deceives absolutely no one with active brain cells. The crunch of gravel beneath his tires quickly became the most grating soundtrack in our neighborhood. Our fourth week brought another charming interaction. I was washing my F-150, which has veteran plates and no commercial markings, when Derek approached as if he were apprehending Al Capone. "Commercial vehicle violation," he declared, spitting tobacco juice into a Mountain Dew bottle. The sound made me want to acquaint him with some advanced dental procedures. "Fines $200? I presented him with the registration, indicated the veteran plates, and clarified basic vehicle classifications. Derek simply shrugged. "My measurement's what counts, pal." The mixture of his cheap cologne and tobacco spit was nauseating enough to be weaponized. This clown couldn't intimidate a sleeping puppy, yet he had Brenda's endorsement and a neighborhood too civil to challenge such obvious fraud. Sarah attempted to reason with him but was met with more aggressive posturing. "Maybe your husband needs to understand military don't make rules here." That evening, I spent hours researching Texas HOA law until 2 a.m. and uncovered some quite interesting legal loopholes, but I still held on to diplomacy over demolition, a significant error. Brenda and Derek were only just getting started. Week 6 delivered Derek's crowning achievement of stupidity. A citation for grass height exceeding community standards. I was reading the notice over my morning coffee, the good kind that tastes like victory, not base mess hall sludge, when I saw the fine, $200 with an additional $50 penalty for each day until it was corrected. The issue was, I had measured my lawn the previous day, and it was precisely 3.25 inches. The HOA limit is 3.5 inches, so either my ruler was defective or Derek had failed basic math along with everything else. I went outside to measure again, and sure enough, it was 3.25 inches, well within the regulation. The morning dew gave the grass a fresh, clean scent, a stark contrast to the stench of Derek's fraudulent citation. When I contacted Derek to address his measurement mistake, his reply was pure poetry. "My measurement's what counts, pal. Maybe your wife needs to understand the rules better." The veiled threat in his tone caused my jaw to tighten. In Fallujah, individuals who threatened families were introduced to advanced conflict resolution techniques, but this wasn't a war zone. This was suburbia, where issues are resolved with paperwork, not precision strikes. That night, I studied the law books as if I were preparing for a mission briefing. Years of military legal training had taught me something crucial. Bureaucrats invariably leave a paper trail, and paper trails expose vulnerabilities. I scoured the Texas Property Code until my eyes ached and located exactly what I needed. It turned out Derek's citation was in violation of 3 separate requirements. It lacked specific measurements, a licensed inspector's signature, and adherence to their own established procedures. I recalled a JAG buddy once advising me, "Always demand documentation. Most fake authority figures can't produce legitimate paperwork." A wise man, this advice was about to prove extremely valuable. So, I submitted a formal complaint to the HOA board, requesting Derek's credentials and the proper measurement documentation. It was professional, by the book, and entirely legitimate. Brenda's reaction was to call an emergency board meeting for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, a time when nearly every working resident would be unable to attend. The meeting notification came just 24 hours in advance, barely legal even by their own bylaws. It seemed she had modeled her governance on a dictator's handbook. Sarah offered to attend since I was required to be at the base for mandatory training. My wife entered that community center like Daniel walking into the lion's den, armed only with facts and noble intentions. The fluorescent lights hummed like agitated wasps as Brenda filled the room with her loyal supporters. Nancy, a divorced neighbor who believed military families were overly aggressive. Bob, a retired accountant who rubber-stamped everything Brenda proposed, and 2 other residents who were indebted to Brenda for real estate favors. The aroma of burnt coffee hung in the air, likely from a pot that had been sitting since the Clinton administration. Nancy's anxious pencil tapping sounded like a woodpecker having a panic attack. Sarah laid out our case with professionalism. Derek's citation was missing the necessary documentation. The measurements were inconsistent with reality. The enforcement procedures had not been followed. She requested that Derek furnish his proper credentials and remeasure our lawn in the presence of witnesses. A fair request, wouldn't you agree? In a rational world, perhaps, but this is where events took a peculiar turn. Rather than addressing our valid concerns, Brenda executed a move directly from a tyrant's playbook. The board has decided to increase enforcement standards to maintain property values. Derek now has full authority to issue immediate citations for any visual violations. The vote passed 3-1. Sarah's dissenting voice was ignored like a whisper in a hurricane. They had literally altered the rules mid-game to protect their fake cop's fragile ego. I had encountered this tactic before in corrupt local governments overseas. When you can't win honestly, simply change the rules. Derek celebrated by appearing the next day with a laminated Enforcement Authority badge, likely made at Kinko's between someone's business cards and missing cat posters, and proceeded to unleash a storm of citations. Kids' bikes on the lawn. Fire hazard, $150 fine. Garden hose visible from the street. Aesthetic violation, $150 fine. Welcome mat not perfectly centered. Community standards breach, $150 fine. The total damage in a single afternoon was $450. At this pace, Derek could fund the defense budget of a small nation. Sarah found that the neighborhood Facebook group had transformed into a digital witch trial. Brenda posted, "Some families don't understand community values and proper respect for authority." Nancy chimed in, "Military people think rules don't apply to them because they have guns." The keyboard warriors joined in, questioning everything from our parenting skills to our patriotism. When Sarah responded with facts and diplomacy, she was accused of having a military wife attitude and playing the victim. Meanwhile, I was investigating Derek's background as if I were compiling a target package. My intelligence training was useful here. Always verify credentials before engaging any target. It turned out our security contractor possessed 0 licenses, 0 insurance, and 0 legal authority whatsoever. His company was non-existent in any state database. I contacted the Texas Private Security Board. They had never heard of Derek Hartwell or Titan Security Solutions. This confirmed my suspicions. An unlicensed security agent cannot issue citations, carry restraints, or assert law enforcement authority. Derek was operating entirely outside the bounds of the law, but here's the brilliant part. Derek was unaware that I knew this. I filed complaints with the county sheriff and the state attorney general and requested all HOA financial records under Texas disclosure requirements. It was time to see what other secrets our little dictator had been concealing. Brenda panicked and instructed Derek to handle the situation before it escalated. Derek's interpretation of handle was to double down on harassment and intimidation. The sound of his truck's engine became our daily 6 p.m. reminder that stupidity knows no bounds. Emma began to ask why the mean-spitting man drove by during dinner. Marcus wanted to know if we were in trouble with the police. How do you explain to your children that some adults never learned basic decency? That sometimes good people must stand up to petty tyrants who never matured beyond middle school? I was on the verge of giving Derek a masterclass in consequences. Derek's next brilliant move was to make our family his personal surveillance project. It began subtly. If you consider a white pickup truck with magnetic security signs to be subtle, every evening, precisely at 6 p.m., Derek would cruise past our house as if conducting the world's most conspicuous stakeout. He would park across the street, engine running, and stare through our kitchen window while we were attempting to eat dinner. The smell of his cigarette smoke would waft across the street, mingling with Sarah's homemade lasagna and transforming family time into a dinner theater no one had requested. Then it intensified. Derek began to follow Sarah to the grocery store, sitting in the parking lot like a low-budget private investigator who had learned surveillance techniques from bad television shows. She would emerge with bags of milk and bread, and there would be Derek, watching her load groceries as if she might be smuggling state secrets in her Cheerios. Sarah initially tried to ignore it. She possesses that nurse's mentality where you handle difficult individuals by remaining professional and hoping they eventually discover a hobby that doesn't involve stalking. But Derek wasn't getting tired of it. He was becoming more audacious. The breaking point arrived when Derek confronted our children at the school bus stop. Emma and Marcus were on their way to catch the 7:15 a.m. bus, just being typical kids concerned about math tests rather than neighborhood psychopaths. When Derek pulled up in his wannabe cop car, "Tell your parents their family's getting a reputation in the neighborhood," he said to my 12-year-old daughter. "Maybe they should think about finding a community that's more suitable for their lifestyle." When Emma recounted that story to me, a cold, lethal feeling settled in my chest. The kind of sensation that used to precede very bad days for very bad people in very distant places threatened me, and it's annoying but manageable, threatened my wife, and we have serious problems. But when you interfere with my children, you have crossed into a territory where my specialized skills become exceedingly relevant. However, Sarah persuaded me to address it through legal channels first. A smart woman, she knows I have other options if the civilized method fails to yield results, so I installed security cameras around our property, which is completely legal in Texas. Suddenly, Derek's patterns of harassment became beautifully documented evidence, every creepy drive-by, every stalking incident, every violation of basic human decency, all captured in high-definition video suitable for a courtroom. My intelligence training kicked in, and I began to assemble a genuine dossier on Derek. 2 DUIs, domestic violence arrests that were mysteriously dropped when his ex-girlfriend ceased cooperating, and those failed police academy psychological evaluations that cited aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control. Essentially, Derek was a textbook case of someone who should never be given authority over a goldfish, let alone human beings. But this is where the investigation took an interesting turn. Sarah befriended Bob's wife at the grocery store. Bob, the HOA treasurer who approved everything Brenda put in front of him. It turns out Bob's wife is actually quite delightful when she's not observing her husband enable neighborhood fascism. Over coffee and light gossip about community drama, Bob's wife casually let slip something fascinating. Derek was earning $3,000 a month for his security services. $3,000 a month to harass families and impersonate law enforcement. Having dealt with military budgets, I knew something smelled fishier than week-old sushi. I accessed the HOA's financial records, public documents they are legally obligated to provide, and discovered something beautiful. Derek's payments were being drawn from the Maintenance and Repairs Fund. There was no approved security contract anywhere in the official records, no board vote authorizing the expenditure, and no legitimate paper trail whatsoever. My counterterrorism training included financial investigations, and this bore all the hallmarks of a classic embezzlement scheme. Brenda was paying Derek under the table using community funds, essentially stealing from every family in the neighborhood to finance her personal goon squad. When I casually brought up this discovery to Bob at a neighborhood barbecue, his face turned whiter than his polo shirt. The poor man had no idea Derek was receiving any payments, much less $3,000 monthly. The board had never voted on a security contract because no legitimate contract existed. Derek, in the meantime, was becoming increasingly desperate. He understood that my cameras were documenting every illegal act he committed. So, he chose to intimidate me directly. A grave mistake. He waited in our driveway one evening as I returned from the base, blocking my truck as if he were conducting some kind of official traffic stop. The crunch of gravel under his boots sounded like someone walking on their own grave. "I need to search your vehicle for contraband," Derek announced, his chest puffed out like he was the star of his own action movie. I nearly laughed out loud. This amateur thought he could play cop games with someone who has dealt with actual terrorists in actual combat zones. "Show me your warrant, your badge number, and your supervisor's contact information." I responded with the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly how many ways this could end poorly for him. Derek began to fumble like a freshman trying to explain missing homework. He realized he couldn't produce any legitimate credentials. Finally, he admitted he was a contractor for the HOA but maintained that he had the same authority as police officers. I decided to offer some free legal education. Contractors have zero law enforcement authority in Texas. They can observe and report, period. No searches, no detentions, no citations, no physical confrontations, and no pretending to be someone important. Derek's face turned crimson. He started screaming about military people thinking they're special and not respecting civilian authority. The irony was poetic. A fake cop lecturing a real military officer about legitimate authority. That's when the neighborhood dam finally burst. Mrs. Chun reported that Derek had demanded to inspect her garden for foreign plant violations. The Rodriguez family received citations for ethnic cooking odors that somehow violated community standards. Mrs. Patterson found Derek in her backyard, claiming he needed to check her fence height. At midnight, Sarah created a shared Google document to track all the harassment complaints. The timeline revealed a systematic targeting of minorities and military families, precisely the kind of discrimination pattern that makes federal attorneys salivate. The legal net was tightening around Derek and Brenda like a well-planned tactical operation. They were about to learn why you never corner a predator with nothing left to lose. Derek's behavior descended into full-blown stalker territory faster than a fighter jet engaging its afterburners. It began with the parking lot ambushes. Sarah would conclude her shift at the children's hospital. 12 hours of saving children's lives and comforting worried parents, only to discover Derek waiting by her car like a discount bounty hunter who had learned intimidation from YouTube tutorials. He would stand between Sarah and her vehicle, arms folded, insisting he needed to conduct Security interviews about neighborhood violations. The first time this occurred, Sarah attempted to be polite because that's her nature. Someone who believes reasonable people can resolve issues through dialogue. Derek, I'm tired and I need to get home to my children. This is official HOA business. Ma'am, I need to discuss your family's ongoing violations. What violations? Our grass was at regulation height, our car was parked correctly, and our kids' bikes were stored in the garage like good little suburbanites. But Derek would just stand there, obstructing her path, compelling Sarah to listen to his fabricated infractions while hospital parking lot security wondered why this obvious lunatic was harassing their top pediatric nurse. The psychological warfare intensified when I was deployed for mandatory 2-week training. Derek somehow discovered my schedule, likely through Brenda's real estate network, and amplified the harassment the instant my truck was gone from our driveway. It was as if he had a Derek signal that activated whenever the intimidating military man left town. Sarah started noticing footprints beneath our bedroom window. My security cameras captured Derek prowling around our backyard at night with a flashlight. He later claimed he was checking for fence violations after dark. The man was literally peeping into our home, using HOA enforcement as a cover for behavior that would have actual police officers reaching for their handcuffs. When Sarah contacted the non-emergency police line, the dispatcher's reply caused my blood pressure to surge to combat zone levels. Sounds like a civil HOA matter? Ma'am, you'll need to work it out through your community association. A civil matter. Some psychopath is lurking around my house at night while I am away serving my country, and local law enforcement treats it like a property line disagreement. I made a mental note to have a very informative discussion with that police department upon my return. From 2,000 miles away, I orchestrated a response using skills not taught in civilian management programs. My battle buddy, Marcus, a 6 feet 4 inches Marine who makes Derek look like a malnourished teenager with authority issues, began conducting random wellness checks on my family. He just happened to be in the neighborhood, visiting his old Navy friend's wife and kids. It's amusing how Derek's nocturnal reconnaissance missions ceased immediately after Marcus introduced himself and casually mentioned his hobby of collecting examples of civilian harassment for military legal training purposes. But Derek discovered new methods to make Sarah's life miserable. He started appearing at the children's hospital, claiming official HOA business that required him to speak with Mrs. Steele immediately. Hospital security had to escort him off the premises twice before banning him entirely. The scent of desperation was becoming more potent than Derek's cheap cologne mixed with delusion. That's when Derek made his most foolish move yet. Filing a false 911 report alleging a domestic disturbance at our residence, police arrived to find Sarah assisting Emma with algebra homework while Marcus practiced piano. Essentially the most threatening domestic scene since Leave It to Beaver. Derek insisted he had heard military-style yelling and the sounds of combat training emanating from our house. The responding officer, a veteran himself, took one look at our tranquil suburban home and understood that Derek was either completely delusional or pathologically dishonest. "Sir, I must warn you about filing false emergency reports." The officer informed Derek with the patience of a saint dealing with an imbecile. "That's a criminal offense in Texas, punishable by up to 6 months in jail." Derek's reply highlighted his complete detachment from reality. These military families know how to cover up domestic situations. They're trained in deception and psychological warfare. The officer's expression shifted from professional politeness to barely restrained disgust. Nobody appreciates being lectured on deception by someone who impersonates law enforcement for pocket money. I later discovered that this officer included Derek's bizarre accusations in his report, creating excellent documentation of harassment and false reporting. This 911 stunt backfired more spectacularly than Derek's career aspirations. Instead of causing trouble for our family, he had generated an official police report that documented his pattern of harassment and mental instability. But Derek saw the officer's warning as a betrayal rather than free legal advice. In his warped view, everyone was conspiring against him. The police, hospital security, neighbors who wouldn't validate his imaginary authority. Probably the mailman, too. Brenda, sensing the legal walls closing in like a flawlessly executed pincer movement, attempted to distance herself from Derek's escalating madness. "Maybe you should tone down the enforcement until things settle," she proposed during one of their parking lot strategy sessions, which my cameras documented in beautiful high-definition detail. Derek heard "tone down" and translated it as "Brenda is abandoning me for those military bullies." Paranoia enveloped him like fog rolling over San Francisco Bay, except this fog was a permanent fixture. Unlike Derek's delusions, Sarah's daily routine became Derek's unhealthy fixation: grocery store trips, school pickups, evening walks. Derek shadowed her movements like a predator studying its praise patterns, the relentless surveillance war on Sarah's nerves. Yet she maintained her composure with a grace that makes me proud to call her my wife. I cut my training exercise short and returned home early. Officially on family emergency leave, my commanding officer, a father himself, understood perfectly. Some situations demand an immediate tactical response. Derek anticipated my absence for another week. Instead, he was about to walk into a perfectly laid ambush that would permanently terminate his reign of suburban terror. The element of surprise was going to be decisive. While Sarah was filing her police report concerning the assault, I was in my garage, analyzing months of security footage like a detective building a case against the suburban mafia next door. The scent of motor oil and resolve filled the air as I unearthed something that made Derek's slap seem like jaywalking compared to the federal crimes concealed in plain sight. My intelligence training had conditioned me to identify patterns, and Derek's harassment was not random foolishness. It was systematic targeting based on demographics that would have civil rights attorneys canceling their vacations to start filing lawsuits immediately. The Chun family was harassed about foreign decorations until they took down their beautiful red lanterns, which had welcomed neighbors for decades. The Rodriguez family was cited for cultural music violations during their daughter's quinceañera celebration. Apparently, mariachi music is a greater threat to property values than Derek's tobacco. Spitting, Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow, faced Derek demanding entry to inspect her late husband's workshop for potential safety violations, essentially weaponizing her grief. Every minority family, every vulnerable resident, every household that didn't immediately kiss Derek's phony ring of authority received his special harassment treatment. All the while, Brenda's white suburban allies were violating the same rules daily without a single citation. It's funny how that works in dictatorships, both large and small. But the true bombshell came when my lawyer subpoenaed the HOA's financial records as part of the assault investigation. What we discovered would have made Bernie Madoff send congratulatory notes. Brenda had been systematically embezzling community funds for over 2 years with the ingenuity of a Las Vegas con artist, Derek's security. Payments were merely the appetizers on a buffet of corruption. The pool repair fund was diverted to cover Brenda's personal spa treatments and Botox injections. The landscaping budget was used for Brenda's BMW payments and premium gasoline. Community event funds financed Brenda's divorce attorney and luxury vacations to Cancun, where she likely practiced her victim act on beachside bartenders. The total theft amounted to over $60,000 from maintenance funds, emergency reserves, and special assessments that residents paid under the impression they were improving their community. Instead, they were bankrolling Brenda's post-divorce lifestyle while she employed her criminal nephew to terrorize anyone who might dare to audit the books. Sarah, recuperating at home with a bruised face that served as a daily reminder of why Derek needed to face justice, decided to read our entire HOA contract during her sick leave. Most people sign these documents without scrutinizing the fine print, but Sarah possesses that methodical nurse's brain that notices details everyone else overlooks, much like when patients are not truthful about their symptoms. Tucked away in Section 47C, subsection 12, paragraph 4, she discovered the golden ticket that would dismantle their entire operation. All enforcement actions require approval from 60% of community homeowners through written petition or public vote. Brenda's enforcement authority had never been legally valid. Every citation Derek had issued, every fine he had levied, every harassment campaign he had waged, all of it was based on completely fabricated authority that existed solely in Brenda's power-hungry delusions and Derek's minuscule brain. Meanwhile, the police investigation into Derek's background uncovered why he had failed those psychological evaluations twice. There was a previous restraining order from an ex-girlfriend citing stalking behavior that sounded disturbingly familiar, and a pattern of workplace violence at 3 different security companies. Apparently, Derek's people skills were a consistent problem across multiple jobs. He was currently on probation for his second DUI, which meant the assault charge would violate his probation terms and send him directly to county jail, likely with a cellmate who wouldn't have a high opinion of fake cops. The community's awakening was as rapid as a wildfire in drought conditions. News of the assault spread through neighborhood Facebook groups, And suddenly, families began sharing stories of Derek's harassment that they had kept silent about for months out of fear or embarrassment. Mrs. Patterson disclosed that Derek had demanded entry to her home for mandatory interior inspections. Basically, a home invasion with a clipboard. The young mother from Maple Street shared a video of Derek following her children to school while claiming to be on security escort duties. Even some of Brenda's former allies began to admit that Derek's behavior had made them uncomfortable, but they had been afraid to challenge the HOA president's authority. Brenda's panic was more amusing than cable television. She realized the assault would trigger investigations that would expose her entire criminal enterprise. Her first move was to throw Derek under the bus with more force than a city transit system, claiming he had overstepped his authority and pretending she had tried to control his actions. But Derek, sitting in a county jail cell with ample time to ponder loyalty versus self-preservation, decided that if he was going down for assault, he wasn't going alone for embezzlement. He provided prosecutors with audio recordings of conversations where Brenda specifically instructed him to make the military family understand they're not welcome here and to use whatever pressure necessary to maintain community standards and property values. The sound of Brenda's voice on those recordings, dripping with entitled racism and casual corruption, was music to my ears. The legal dominoes were toppling faster than Derek's fake authority, and the symphony was just reaching its crescendo. It was time to transform my garage into a war room that would make Pentagon planners envious. I converted our 2-car garage into a mission headquarters, complete with whiteboards mapping out Derek's harassment timeline, Brenda's financial crimes, and every legal violation they had committed since their reign of terror on our neighborhood began. The scent of dry erase markers mingled with the aroma of Sarah's stress-baking cookies drifting in from the kitchen. Apparently, chocolate chip therapy was her coping mechanism. While I orchestrated their total downfall, Sarah coordinated community outreach from our kitchen table, which had been transformed into a communications central with laptops, legal documents, and enough coffee cups to caffeinate a small army. The woman who once believed everyone could be reasoned with had evolved into a strategic coordinator capable of organizing grassroots movements between her patient rounds at the hospital. My legal team resembled something out of a military thriller. Maria Gonzalez, an attorney specializing in HOA abuse cases with a personal vendetta against neighborhood tyrants. My old JAG buddy, Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, now a civilian but still possessing that military precision for dismantling bureaucratic corruption. A civil rights lawyer working pro bono because Derek's targeting of minorities had ignited his professional fury, and a constitutional law professor who had authored half the Texas Property Code amendments and was keen to see them applied against blatant criminals. The evidence archive expanded like something from a spy film. Months of security camera footage were edited into a timeline documenting every harassment incident, every illegal trespass, and every civil rights violation committed by Derek and Brenda. Financial records detailed Brenda's embezzlement patterns with a clarity that would make federal prosecutors smile in their sleep. I recalled my instructor at intelligence school saying, "Document everything. Criminals always believe they're smarter than they actually are, and paper trails don't lie under oath." Brenda and Derek had left behind enough evidence to convict a small criminal organization, which, in essence, they were. Sarah organized coffee with concerned neighbors meetings that began with 5 attendees and swelled to 47 families demanding HOA reform. She established a WhatsApp group named the Oakwood Accountability Network, which became the neighborhood's central nervous system for sharing information and coordinating legal actions. This community coalition building reminded me of winning hearts and minds, operations overseas. Except instead of combating insurgents, we were battling suburban fascists. With fake badges and real embezzlement schemes, our media strategy unfolded organically when a local news reporter, Jennifer Walsh, heard about the assault on a military wife. She had been covering HOA abuse stories for years, waiting for a case dramatic enough to seize public attention. A phony cop slapping a pediatric nurse while her Navy SEAL husband watched through the kitchen window was ratings gold and social justice combined in an irresistible package. Social media erupted faster than ordnance in an ammunition depot, #accountable HOAs and #military families matter started trending locally before spreading statewide as other military families shared their own harassment experiences. A YouTube channel called HOA Horror featured our situation and amassed 50,000 subscribers in a single week. The legal strategy was a multi-front assault, much like a coordinated military campaign. Criminal charges against Derek for assault, stalking, and impersonating an officer. a civil lawsuit against both Derek and the HOA for harassment damages, civil rights violations, and emotional distress. A financial recovery action demanding Brenda pay restitution for the embezzled community funds, and a constitutional challenge arguing that the HOA's enforcement exceeded legal boundaries and violated due process rights. My forensic accountant, a former military intelligence analyst who specialized in tracking terrorist financing, traced Brenda's embezzled funds like following breadcrumbs to the witch's cottage. She had used HOA funds for personal vacations, luxury car payments, and even Derek's gambling debts at a local casino. The total community theft surpassed $75,000 over 3 years of creative bookkeeping. I organized Know Your Rights workshops for homeowners that attracted residents from 6 different neighborhoods. The sessions covered HOA legal limits, enforcement procedures, financial oversight requirements, and how to identify when a community association has become a criminal enterprise disguised as property management. The attendance figures spoke for themselves. Over 200 people showed up because Derek and Brenda's behavior was not an isolated incident. Across Texas, bogus HOA enforcement was becoming an epidemic of petty tyrants with clipboards terrorizing families who simply wanted to live in peace in their own homes. My opposition research uncovered connections that would make conspiracy theorists proud. Brenda's real estate license was under review for ethics violations related to fraudulent property disclosures. Derek had been terminated from 3 previous security companies for aggressive behavior toward clients. Several HOA board members were preparing to cooperate with investigators in exchange for immunity from fraud charges. The beauty of military planning lies in its accounting for multiple contingencies and ensuring victory through overwhelming force applied at decisive points. Derek and Brenda had initiated a fight with a force that had superior numbers, better intelligence, legitimate legal authority, and community support that strengthened daily. Veterans organizations offered legal assistance and media amplification. The Texas HOA Reform Coalition adopted our case as its legislative priority for the upcoming session. Military family advocacy groups launched letter-writing campaigns to state representatives regarding the protection of service members from civilian harassment. All the pieces were in place. The battlefield was set. The enemy was isolated, demoralized, and confronted with overwhelming force from multiple directions. It was time to execute the final phase and watch these suburban terrorists face the consequences of their actions. Facing criminal charges and a civil lawsuit that would bankrupt her twice over, Brenda transitioned from neighborhood dictator to desperate sociopath faster than Derek's fake authority had disintegrated under legal scrutiny. Her first brilliant tactic was to hire a private investigator to unearth dirt on my military service, hoping to find evidence of PTSD, combat incidents, or anything that might discredit me in court. The scent of desperation was stronger than the stale cigarettes in whatever bargain basement PI office she had located in the Yellow Pages. This investigation backfired spectacularly when my commanding officer learned that a civilian was attempting to access classified military records without authorization. It turns out the Defense Department takes a very dim view of random individuals snooping through SEAL operational histories, especially when those individuals are under federal investigation for embezzlement and conspiracy. But Brenda wasn't done embarrassing herself. She created fake social media accounts to spread rumors about our family, claiming Jake was leveraging his military status for special treatment and implying Sarah had provoked the assault through aggressive behavior toward community volunteers. The irony was exquisite. A woman who had stolen $75,000 from her neighbors was lecturing others on ethics and community values. It was like receiving marriage advice from someone on their 4th divorce, but with more criminal liability. From his county jail cell, Derek gave interviews to anyone with a microphone, claiming self-defense and framing the assault as a reasonable reaction to military intimidation. His lawyer advanced the narrative that Derek was merely a community volunteer trying to help who felt threatened by a trained killer with anger management issues. The character assassination campaign intensified when anonymous flyers appeared throughout our neighborhood, alleging I had combat PTSD and was a danger to community safety. These flyers included fabricated quotes from unnamed military sources expressing concern about veterans with unresolved trauma, living near families with children. Sarah discovered me in the garage one evening, staring at one of these flyers with the kind of cold fury that used to precede very bad days for very bad people in distant lands. But instead of losing my composure, I did something that terrified Brenda more than any display of anger could have. I methodically documented everything and added it to our evidence file, My wife placed her hand on my shoulder and said something that reminded me why I married the smartest woman in Texas. They're not attacking you because you're dangerous, Jake. They're attacking you because they're scared, and scared people make stupid mistakes. The smear campaign broadened when Brenda's real estate contacts began spreading rumors to potential home buyers, claiming our street was unstable due to military family controversy and suggesting property values were declining because of ongoing legal disputes with aggressive residents. But this is where Brenda's desperation exposed her complete foolishness. Every fake social media post, every anonymous flyer, and every whispered rumor could be traced back to her through digital forensics and witness testimony. She was inadvertently building our defamation case while simultaneously destroying her own credibility. Sarah became the target of increasingly personal attacks. Anonymous calls to the children's hospital questioning her emotional stability and fitness to work with vulnerable children. Fake online reviews claiming she had been unprofessional and aggressive toward patients' families, and social media posts suggesting she was manipulating her military hero status for sympathy and special treatment. The hospital administration's response was swift and decisive. They enhanced security, reported the harassment to the police, and issued a public statement supporting their exemplary pediatric nurse whose dedication to children's healthcare is beyond question. It seems that attacking someone beloved by the parents of children she had helped save was another strategic blunder in Brenda's campaign of self-destruction. Meanwhile, Derek's desperation reached new, pathetic depths. He tried to make contact through third parties, using his girlfriend to drive past our house and take photos for documentation purposes. When that led to additional stalking charges, he attempted to discuss the case on social media, despite explicit court orders prohibiting contact. Each violation led to tighter bail restrictions and longer potential sentences. Derek was literally extending his own prison time through the same impulse control issues that had caused his rejection from the police academy in the first place. The legal maneuvering revealed coordinated defense strategies that pointed to an ongoing conspiracy. Derek's attorney and Brenda's lawyer were sharing information, coordinating motions, and presenting a unified defense, indicating continued criminal collaboration even as they faced separate charges. My favorite moment occurred when their defense attorneys filed motions claiming my military training made me an unreliable witness whose combat experience affects objective judgment. They requested psychological evaluations, tried to exclude security camera evidence as an invasion of privacy, and pushed for the case to be dismissed based on a mutual combat theory. The judge's response was a work of legal art. Mr. Steele's military service record shows exemplary conduct and heroic service to our nation. The defendant's criminal records show assault, fraud, and harassment of military families. This court will not entertain arguments that service to one's country disqualifies someone from receiving equal protection under the law. That ruling made local news and went viral among military families nationwide. Suddenly, our neighborhood disagreement had become a national symbol of military family rights and civilian accountability. But Brenda and Derek were not finished destroying themselves. Their final, desperate acts were about to create the perfect stage for a public vindication that would be remembered long after they were forgotten in the prison cells where they belonged. Facing an inevitable criminal conviction and financial ruin, Brenda decided to deploy her nuclear option. Throwing Derek under the bus so hard he would need a new zip code, her new strategy involved fabricating documentation to show she had attempted to fire Derek months earlier, complete with backdated letters claiming he had exceeded his authority and ignored direct supervisory instructions. The scent of desperation mixed with printer toner as she worked overtime creating a fake paper trail. That wouldn't deceive a kindergarten teacher, let alone federal investigators. But Brenda's magnum opus of stupidity was staging a break-in at her own home, complete with threatening notes that referenced military combat tactics and advanced warfare training. She filed police reports alleging that my military friends were intimidating her family through psychological warfare techniques learned overseas. The performance was Oscar-worthy in its incompetence. Brenda claimed intruders had ransacked her house but left expensive jewelry untouched, stolen important documents while ignoring cash, and left threatening notes written in block letters that looked suspiciously like her own handwriting from HOA meeting minutes. The police investigation took approximately 48 hours to completely expose the charade. Security footage from neighboring houses showed no intruders, only Brenda moving her own belongings around and creating artificial evidence of a forced entry. The threatening notes were written on paper that matched her home printer. Using ink consistent with pens found in her kitchen drawer, Detective Morrison, the lead investigator, later told me, Brenda's fake break-in was the most obviously staged crime scene I've encountered in 20 years of police work, including cases where teenagers tried to fake their own kidnappings to avoid final exams. This false flag operation resulted in additional charges: filing false police reports, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. Brenda had literally arrested herself through inept criminal behavior that would have been comedic gold if it weren't so pathetically desperate. Derek's response from his jail cell was swift and brutal. Realizing Brenda was abandoning him to save her own skin, he released audio recordings that annihilated any shred of credibility she might have retained. The recordings were devastating, Brenda's voice, crystal clear, instructing Derek to make the military family understand they're not welcome in our community, and to use whatever methods necessary to maintain property values and neighborhood standards. Her casual use of racial slurs when discussing minority families would make federal hate crime prosecutors salivate, but the most damning recording captured Brenda explaining her embezzlement scheme with the pride of someone sharing a favorite recipe. These people are too stupid to audit the books properly, so we just move money around and call it different things. They pay their dues like good little sheep while we maintain real control over community decisions. Derek had been recording their conversations for months, initially as insurance against potential legal problems. Instead, he had documented a comprehensive criminal conspiracy that would send Brenda to federal prison for years, not months. The community's reaction was swift and merciless. Even Brenda's most loyal supporters deserted her faster than passengers on a sinking ship. Nancy, her former best friend, publicly apologized for supporting criminal behavior disguised as community leadership. Bob resigned as treasurer and cooperated fully with investigators to avoid prosecution for unknowingly facilitating embezzlement. Sarah, meanwhile, had transformed from a victim into a community organizer with the efficiency of someone who had discovered her true purpose. She organized emergency HOA meetings that drew attendance numbers not seen since the neighborhood Christmas parties. Except these gatherings were focused on criminal accountability rather than holiday cheer. The petition demanding Brenda's immediate resignation gathered signatures from 89% of neighborhood residents within 72 hours. The remaining 11% consisted of 3 families who were traveling and 2 houses that were currently vacant due to owner relocations. But Brenda's desperation reached new heights of criminal folly when she attempted to flee the state with suitcases full of cash and falsified documents. Airport security found her at Dallas-Fort Worth International with $47,000 in cash, fake identification documents, and travel itineraries to non-extradition countries. Her arrest at the airport was captured by news crews who had been monitoring the case, creating viral video footage of Brenda being handcuffed while screaming about military conspiracies and harassment by government agents. Her meltdown became internet famous under hashtags like #HOAKaren and #FakeBreakinFail. Additional charges included money laundering, flight risk violations, and possession of fraudulent identification. Bail was revoked entirely, landing Brenda in the same county jail as Derek, where they could enjoy each other's company while awaiting federal prosecution. The irony was perfect. 2 criminals who had terrorized their community with fake authority now faced real authority in the form of federal judges, FBI investigations, and prison sentences that would last longer than most people's mortgages. Sarah was elected temporary HOA president by a unanimous vote from families who had witnessed her transformation from a harassment victim into a community leader. Her first official actions were to eliminate private security, refund all illegitimate fines, and implement financial transparency requirements that would prevent future embezzlement schemes. Derek and Brenda had initiated this conflict to intimidate one military family into submission. Instead, they had united an entire community around justice, accountability, and the principle that criminals with clipboards are still criminals. Their reign of suburban terror was finished, but the consequences of their actions were only just beginning. The monthly county commissioners' meeting served as the stage for Derek and Brenda's final public humiliation, complete with live television coverage and an audience that resembled a military family rally mixed with a neighborhood watch convention. The auditorium buzzed with the energy of over 300 residents, veterans groups in support military families t-shirts, and local media crews arranging their equipment as if covering a presidential debate. the aroma of fresh coffee from the lobby, blended with anticipation as people who had followed our story for months were about to witness justice in real time. Commissioner Martinez called me as the primary witness for the HOA reform discussion, and I approached the podium with the measured confidence that comes from possessing overwhelming evidence and perfectly controlled righteous fury. The clicking of cameras sounded like distant gunfire as I began a testimony that would be replayed on news channels across the state. Commissioners, we moved to Oakwood Estates seeking community. Instead, we found predators wearing badges of fake authority who used harassment, embezzlement, and assault to terrorize families into submission. The large screen behind me displayed the video of Derek's assault in crystal-clear detail, followed by financial documents illustrating Brenda's systematic theft of community funds, every fraudulent citation, every illicit payment, every violation of civil rights was documented with the precision of a military intelligence briefing. This criminal conspiracy stole over $75,000 from hardworking families while targeting minorities and military personnel for special harassment. They didn't just break laws. They broke trust, safety, and the basic social contract that makes communities possible. Sarah's testimony delivered the emotional impact that legal documents could not convey. She showed photographs of her facial bruising, described children who were afraid to play outside due to Derek's stalking, and explained how the systematic harassment had traumatized families who simply wanted to live peacefully in their own neighborhood. No family should have to endure an assault for displaying an American flag in their yard. No community should tolerate criminals disguised as authority figures. And no military spouse should have to fear for her children's safety while her husband is serving our country overseas. The procession of community witnesses was devastating. Mrs. Chan, her voice trembling with age and resolve, described Derek demanding the removal of cultural decorations that had welcomed neighbors for decades. The Rodriguez family explained how their children had stopped playing traditional music to avoid Derek's harassment. Mrs. Patterson revealed Derek's midnight trespassing and his demands to enter her home for mandatory inspections. Derek's appearance was the pathetic climax everyone had awaited. Brought from jail in an orange jumpsuit and shackles, he mumbled a court-ordered apology that sounded like someone reading a grocery list under threat of further charges. I apologize for my actions and recognize they were inappropriate and illegal, Derek recited without emotion or sincerity, his eyes fixed on the floor like a scolded child caught stealing cookies. When Commissioner Rodriguez asked if he wished to explain his behavior, Derek's reply exposed the delusional thinking that had fueled months of harassment. I felt threatened by his military training and thought I was protecting the community from dangerous people. The audience's reaction was immediate and brutal. Disgusted murmurs rippled through the crowd as people realized Derek still saw military families as threats needing his protection rather than heroes deserving community support. Brenda's absence spoke volumes about her cowardice. Federal custody prevented her attendance, but her attorney read a prepared statement blaming Derek for exceeding authority and claiming any financial irregularities were bookkeeping errors committed by volunteer staff with inadequate training. The community's response was swift and merciless. Audible boos filled the auditorium as people who had endured months of harassment heard Brenda's final attempt to shirk responsibility for criminal behavior that had destroyed their neighborhood's peace and safety. Commissioner Martinez asked for my reform recommendations, and I produced the 47-page report that Sarah and I had compiled with military precision and community input. Every family deserves safety in their own community. That's what we fought to defend overseas, and that's what we demand here at home. The mic drop moment came when I outlined specific legislative reforms: mandatory licensing for HOA enforcement personnel, financial oversight requirements to prevent embezzlement, and enhanced penalties for the harassment of military families. This report will become our template for a county HOA oversight ordinance that will protect future families from experiencing the terrorism we endured. Sheriff's Commander Williams provided official vindication by publicly apologizing for the initial dismissive responses to our harassment complaints and announcing new protocols for investigating fraudulent security operations. We failed this military family initially, but we have learned from that failure. No future family will suffer months of stalking and harassment before law enforcement takes appropriate action. The legal victory was comprehensive and final. The civil lawsuit settled for $175,000 in damages plus attorney fees, with Brenda's house being sold to pay restitution and Derek's wages garnished for the next decade. Local TV interviews outside the courthouse captured our message to military families nationwide. We serve our country. We shouldn't have to fight wars in our own neighborhoods. 2. The story went national within hours, picked up by CNN, Fox News, Military Times, and Veterans Today. Our neighborhood dispute had become a symbol of military family rights and civilian accountability that would inspire legislation in 12 states. Derek and Brenda had set out to intimidate one family into submission. Instead, they had created a national movement for military family protection and HOA reform that would outlast their prison sentences by decades. Sometimes justice isn't just served. It's delivered with overwhelming force by people who refuse to be victims. 6 months later, Derek completed his 18-month jail sentence and stumbled back into a world that had moved on without him. Barred from any security work and struggling with minimum wage jobs. He lived with his mother in a trailer park 30 miles from our neighborhood. Close enough to be reminded of his failures, yet far enough to never threaten anyone again. His probation officer reported that Derek spent most visits complaining about military families destroying honest people's lives. Apparently still convinced he was the victim in a story where he had assaulted a pediatric nurse for carrying groceries. Some people never learn, which is why permanent restraining orders exist. Brenda's federal conviction led to 4 years in a minimum security prison, $200,000 in restitution, and 10 years of probation that would monitor every financial transaction she made until 2035. Her real estate empire collapsed faster than her credibility, with personal bankruptcy following her criminal conviction like thunder follows lightning. She spent her prison time in the laundry facility, washing clothes and likely dreaming of the community funds she had stolen to maintain her lifestyle. Early release was improbable since she had made zero progress on her restitution payments. It turns out federal judges don't accept bookkeeping errors as an explanation for systematic embezzlement. Oakwood Estates, under Sarah's leadership, transformed into the community we had originally hoped to find. Property values rose by 18% due to positive media attention and reformed governance that attracted military families seeking veteran-friendly neighborhoods. Our HOA became the state model for transparent financial management and resident-focused policies. The Military Family Resilience Scholarship was founded using recovered embezzlement funds plus community donations to support children who had experienced harassment trauma. Emma and Marcus were the first recipients, earning academic recognition despite enduring months of psychological warfare from adults who should have been protecting neighborhood children instead of terrorizing them. Sarah completed her paralegal certification and became Texas's foremost advocate for HOA reform, traveling to speak at military bases about civilian harassment and legal remedies. Her expertise assisted dozens of military families in fighting similar battles, turning our nightmare into a resource for protecting other service members. The ripple effects surpassed our wildest expectations. The Texas Military Family Protection Act passed with bipartisan support, mandating background checks for HOA enforcement personnel and imposing enhanced penalties for discriminatory harassment. 12 other states introduced similar legislation. Citing our case as inspiration for protecting military families from civilian abuse, I transitioned to a civilian career in veteran family advocacy, consulting for military families facing harassment and developing training materials for base legal assistance offices. My experience fighting suburban terrorists translated surprisingly well to helping other families navigate bureaucratic corruption and fake authority figures. Our annual Community Unity Festival replaced the old, divisive HOA meetings with a celebration of diversity, veteran appreciation, and children's activities. The event raised funds for military family support services, while Derek's old patrol route became a family 5K fun run that attracted participants from 6 neighboring communities. The festival's highlight was always the American flag ceremony, where I reinstalled the original flag that had sparked this entire conflict. Children who had once hidden from Derek's harassment now played freely, while their parents watched military families receive the community respect we had fought to establish. The statistical proof of our success was overwhelming. 0 harassment complaints filed since the reforms were implemented, 95% resident satisfaction with transparent HOA leadership, and a 300% increase in military family applications for our neighborhood urban planning. Students studied our governance model for their thesis research on community accountability. Mrs. Chen's garden flourished with cultural decorations that welcomed visitors instead of triggering citations. The Rodriguez family hosted monthly cultural appreciation events featuring traditional music that enriched community life rather than violating imaginary noise ordinances. Mrs. Patterson's grandchildren visited regularly, playing in the yard where Derek once prowled with flashlights and fake authority. Derek and Brenda had aimed to create a community where they held absolute power over neighbors too intimidated to resist. Instead, they forged a neighborhood where accountability, diversity, and military family support became foundational principles that earned national recognition. Sarah's final interview with Military Spouse magazine captured our journey perfectly. Evil succeeds when good people remain silent. We chose to document, organize, and fight back through legal channels. Our victory belongs to every military family facing civilian harassment. My advice to other military families: document everything, know your rights, build community coalitions, and never surrender to bullies with clipboards. Justice delayed isn't justice denied if you're persistent enough to outlast the criminals. Share your HOA nightmare story in the comments below. You are not alone, and together, we can hold these suburban terrorists accountable. Subscribe for more military family victory stories and visit militaryfamilyrights.org for legal resources that turn victims into victors. Next week, a Navy intelligence officer discovers the HOA president's husband is stealing mail. He's about to learn why you don't mess with someone trained in counterintelligence. The sound of children laughing where Derek's truck once intimidated families. The smell of community barbecues replacing the stench of corruption. And the sight of American flags flying proudly throughout a neighborhood that learned to fight for the values they represent. Sometimes, the good guys win. Sometimes, justice is served with overwhelming force, and sometimes suburban terrorists learn that military families don't retreat. We regroup, we plan, and we execute victory with a precision that leaves enemies wondering how they ever thought they could win.